So this will be our last video on Pyrrhus Cineas. I hope you all have enjoyed reading this and walking through it with me as much as I've enjoyed sort of talking about it. Just a few things I think it's important for the conclusion. Back on page 136, Beauvoir had said that in order to establish a rapport with the other, there must be these two conditions. One, I must be allowed to appeal, so I have to be able to make my appeal to the other. I will therefore struggle against those who want to stifle my voice, prevent me from expressing myself, and prevent me from being. To make myself exist before free men, I will often be compelled to treat some men as objects. A prisoner will kill his jailer to join up with his comrades, so when they're repressing my voice and when I'm not even able to make the appeal. So if I can't appeal to the other's freedom to attempt to negotiate something with them, I can only act on them through force. I can act on the facticity of their body, right? So again, this goes back to the discussion of violence that we had previously. Not desirable to do violence, measure of last resort, but sometimes unavoidable and perhaps even necessary in certain circumstances. So one, I have to be able to make the appeal. And then two, I must have before me men who are free for me and who can respond, right? And this goes back to what we've already discussed, that in the other's freedom is total because the situation is only to be surpassed, and freedom is equal in every surpassing. So we talked before about that equality of freedom. But it's important that these two conditions are sort of highlighted as we move into the conclusion, that I must be able to make my appeal, and that I must have others free for me, so that they can hear my appeal and respond in certain ways, so that they can offer me those points of departure, and vice versa. Right. So with those two things in mind, we can return then to the conceit that frames the essay. In the conclusion, Cineas asks, and after that, I ask that freedoms turn back toward me in order to necessitate my actions. We want this, again, because the structure of the for itself is this reflected reflecting, my freedom gets in a relationship with others also reflected back to me. I'm also shown to myself, right, through my relationship with others. I appear as a part of these relationships and so on. Now, she is going to combat then, well, shouldn't we conclude then that all is vanity? It's all just the, sort of this vain pursuit of these projects that aren't necessarily going to be fulfilled. My appeal may not be heard. Even if it does, it's not going to be grounded in some transcendental absolute that extends beyond humanity or touches me to the infinite or makes my project eternal or anything like that. So isn't it all, vain? This sort of back to that problem. She says then, and I think that this section is really interesting because of the way that Beauvoir somewhat distinguishes herself from Sartre. So she starts to talk about reflection, that it reveals to me every project leaves room for a new question. Within myself I have a negative power with respect to my project and myself, through which I appear as emerging in nothingness. It releases me from the illusion of false objectivity. Remember, as she ties some things together here at the end, false objectivity is that mistake that I make when I assume that my values have some sort of absolute value that are justified by anything other than my commitment and engagements in the world, as if history would vindicate me, or God would vindicate me, or the laws of nature are behind me, or evolution as a force of natural law or something like that. No, it's all about so again, false objectivity is the mistake that my values are grounded in those things that are external to humanity and its projects, right? So here, with the emphasis on this negative power, you see Beauvoir kind of walking that philosophical path with Sartre. But then, when you turn on to page 140, she shifts her emphasis away from nothingness. So she doesn't center nothingness here in the same way that you find in discussions that Sartre carries on. And I think that this is an important distinction and a place in which Beauvoir really stands apart as saying something positive beyond the mere assertion of, the nothingness at the heart of being and all that kind of stuff. So, really important section in the concluding remarks that she makes on page 140. So she says, I learn from it that there is no other end in the world besides my ends, no other place besides the one that I carve out for myself, and other men do not have in their possession the values that I wish to attain either. If I transcend them, they can do nothing for me. That theme again of we can do nothing for. So obviously they can't do anything for me either. In order to be recognized by them, I must first recognize them. So there has to be that mutual recognition, and this act of recognition is extremely important in existential ethics, and Beauvoir in particular. So there has to be this mutual recognition. Our freedom supports each other like stones in an arch, but in an arch that no pillars support. So it's, again, the idea of humanity being self-supporting, right? That there's no pillar external to human existence. Humanity is entirely suspended in a void that it creates itself by its reflection on its plenitude. So again, there's the springing up of the void, the creation of nothingness, or the arising of nothingness with human consciousness, where it opens that distance between me and the object through the act of negation by which the object becomes present for me, right? But since this void is only a reverse side of the object, right? Since reflection is possible only after spontaneous movement, and again, the movement leaves that mark in history where it becomes a facticity as it recedes into the past, why grant the void, why grant it, or nothingness, the void, a predominance, and condemn human projects by comparing them with the tranquility of nothingness? Reflection makes nothingness spring up around me, on board with Sartre, but reflection is not carried in its heart. Different there. It is not authorized to speak in its name and judge the human condition from its point of view. Wherever there is a point of view, there is not nothingness. And to tell the truth, I can make no other point of view but my own. One and the same finite project throws me into this world and toward these men. If I love a man with an absolute love, his approval is sufficient for me. If I act for a city, a country, I appeal to my fellow citizens, to my fellow countrymen. If I create real ties between me and future centuries, my voice crosses the centuries, and so on. So I think this is really where the Candide's Garden ties this essay then together, that we have to be able to, without that false objectivity, reconcile ourselves to our life, which is ours, and through our actions is really the only thing that is totally and wholly ours. And we're not going to be able to get out of it towards some sort of transcendent heaven or pure objectivity, knowing what the world is like beyond, outside human cognition or beyond the bounds of human perception and so on and so forth. Everything has to be sort of translated into terms that are meaningful to us within our engagements, within our theoretical frames. There's no pure insight into just what is independently or separately of human projects. Even our best scientific theories, which are all awesome and rah science, hinge upon human projects, the human project of doing science and bringing that knowledge into the fold of human sensibility and understanding and so on, right? So that means that there's not just nothingness from these particular point of views, because that's the point of view from which we gain access to the world the way that things appear to us, potential knowledge projects, whether it's in the sciences or learning about art history or whatever, the case might be, right? So I think here's a really interesting point of departure where a lot from being a nothingness is taken on board, but Beauvoir clearly has her own philosophical project as well. I mean, it's something that she's working out, I think, with Sartre, and Sartre is also working out with her. But she clearly has some insights of her own to say. When you read, we'll see this happen in The Ethics of Ambiguity as well. Beauvoir will just like cite being in nothingness. She'll just be like, oh, as Sartre says here, or whatever. And occasionally, I mean, obviously because they're so close to one another and think very highly of each other intellectually, sometimes it gives, I think, a false impression that she's just kind of following along, because her citations of Sartre are all laudatory. They're all more or less positive. But when you are reading closely, you can see that there are clear points of her own creation and divergence from Sartre. She says, one can surpass one project only by realizing another project. So there is that ambiguity of every end is a beginning. We surpass each project, it ends, but that end is just an opening onto the next movement of self-transcendence. This is why it's important, again, to have that rapport with others, where we can open, as a point of departure, the future for each other, because there's always going to be that ongoing thing. If we appear to a hindrance, we can try to block this forward motion and sort of trap someone in a particular project. I think that this is probably at the extreme end what bondage is doing. It's preventing, they're like locked into a project that's determined by the master, or the one who holds them in bondage or coerces them, right? So they're not really able to keep moving forward into this open future because they're locked into the project of another where they play the role of an object, so they're not transcending into the future anymore. One of the things that makes oppression bad, and again, we'll talk more about that. We can see here that Beauvoir has laid the groundworks in Pyrrhus and Cineas to emphasize freedom as the sort of the paramount ethical value. And what's better and worse is opening the opportunity for people to actualize themselves more. You can't really say that more freedom is better, because there's no more or less freedom. Freedom is just a qualitative fact of human existence. It's not quantified as more or less freedom. There's more or less opportunity, and the material conditions can afford us opportunities to enact our freedom. That difference again between metaphysical freedom and the power to enact it that Beauvoir cites. So what we can have more of is opportunity and potential for people to actually pursue their free project and that kind of thing. But freedom it's all there all the time. It's not more or less or anything like that. It's just the ground of your very being, the spontaneous arising of your consciousness out of into the world that's freedom. Freeing yourself from the being of the in itself in order to become for itself. That's there. So the transcendence can be in turn transcended. So again, going into the future. Think again, we've talked about as I approach the horizon recedes continually. So it's constantly opening. I can pick a point on the horizon line from where I stand now to try to arrive at, and I can walk to that spot. I see a tree or a building in the distance, and I go there, and it's on the horizon when I start. When I reach there, I look up, and there's still the horizon ahead of me. It's still opening, right? Every thought, every feeling is a project. Thus, the life of man does not appear as a progress, but as a cycle. So, replacing the idea of progress towards some ultimate or absolute end with the idea of cycles through various particular ends that I have been setting for myself, right? So with, tending this plant in the garden, to go back to Candide's garden, then moving over, tending that plant, moving to now I'm going to weed Now I'm going to water, these various little projects within the grand. If we're using the garden as a metaphor for life, all the little parts and all the little projects that are going on in the overarching project of my life. So it's up to each person to decide how far his project extends without being destroyed. Remember, we have already discussed that at length, right? So then, closing off on the very end here, she says, I can now see that moment of doubt or of ecstasy where all projects seem useless to me as a fit of ill humor or puerile exaltation. Between these two moments, who will judge? They exist together only by a third moment that must in turn be judged. So again, always kicking it back to us. We are responsible for deciding, for judging about where we're going to throw our weight, which side we're on, so on. It is only when I separate myself from the dead person in order to look at him from the outside that the last instant becomes an instant among others, that it becomes a fact of history and so on. Then the dead person is really dead. I transcend all his wishes equally. We can always escape toward an elsewhere, but this elsewhere is still somewhere in the heart of our human condition. We can never escape from that human condition, and we have no way to envision it from outside in order to judge it. It alone makes language possible. It is within our human condition that good and evil are defined. The words utility, progress, and fear have meaning only in a world where the project has made points of view and ends appear. They presuppose this project and cannot be applied to it. Man knows nothing other than himself, and cannot even dream of anything that is not human. What can he therefore be compared? What man could judge man? In whose name would he speak? So she ends there with the question, and we've seen that questioning is really important. Attitude for existentialism, it is an act of negation. It puts things into doubt. It allows things to appear before you so that they can be investigated and so on. So it's very appropriate that she ends with a question. But again, there's no outside or getting out of the human condition. We can pretend to be something else, but that's just a human pretending to be something else. And so something else that you're pretending to be is just what a human being imagines that other thing would be like from the human perspective, right? So you're stuck here. That element of being condemned again arises. So that conclusion really ties together the themes of the essay, almost like sort of in a backward order. She starts with the rapport with others, the necessity of them to help me ground my project because they reflect it back to me with values that they assign to it, and it fits in with the whole situation thanks to other people. So I need that sort of rapport, but we can't do anything like for each other. We all have to do on our own. And we can help or hinder each other in various ways, but the responsibility always gets kicked back to us for decision making and that kind of thing. And that means that there's no sort of getting outside of our own point of view. The emphasis shifts away there from nothingness to sort of the positive content of our projects and our concrete engagements in the world that give our life meaning and direction that we should be happy with. I mean, I think that is what people really ask for, is like a project, their own sort of personal and authentic project to engage themselves with and throw themselves into. That means giving up or resigning ourselves to something less than some grand cosmic narrative that will plug us into the infinite, eternal universe or something like that. But I think Beauvoir, at the end of the day, is like you don't really need that. That's not going to bring you the peace that you are seeking, because you still have to decide on which of those grand narratives and all that kind of stuff to fit yourself into, and you still have to determine its value from your own point of view, its value for you, like why that narrative and not some other one, and so on and so forth. So in some way, I mean, this is a philosophical way of saying, like, forget about that. Don't worry about that. Focus on like your concrete engagements and the things that you're passionate about, and cultivate your garden. I mean, to take up that advice from Candide at the end of Voltaire's novel. And again, that's been the sort of framing device for this essay. So tend your garden, and I will come back to Beauvoir in a different series of videos about the ethics of ambiguity. So that is the sort of best overview of Pyrrhus and Cineas as I can give. Again, I hope you all enjoyed talking about and reading through this text. I really like it a lot. I think it offers a good sort of grounding in the general themes of existentialism more broadly, and gives us good particular insight into Beauvoir and her philosophy particularly. So, okay, thanks everyone. I will see you in the next series.